the public have anything to participate? Excellent. Moving on. We're going to skip the financial review this evening, and it will be on a later agenda. We will move straight to the Regional Emergency Communications Center, and we really appreciate Manager Mangiarotti coming today to help us get a greater understanding of the RECC. Some of our members were able to look through the information we had and still had questions. So I appreciate you being here for that.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for having me. Welcome back to the Francis Faulkner meeting room.
Yes.
I hope you like what we've done with the place. We all new plaster, slightly revised paint colors that still aren't the same, but brighten the room up a little bit. And we're still rolling out the IT improvements to get that screen on that wall and various other things. But that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to talk about the Regional Emergency Communications Center. So I did respond to an email or two on the topic, but I understand there may be other questions, so that I can leave as much time as we need for that, but I can just start with a quick overview. So to start at the beginning, about a year and a half ago, or within the last year, we received a grant to do some feasibility work to determine whether regionalizing our public safety communications would be a good idea. We hired the Collins Center, which is UMass. They have a lot of former municipal officials that work for them as part of their research team. In this case, we were paired up with a former state police officer who was the project lead for us. And he worked with us and the town of Concord to look at our operations, look at our policies, to look at our communities and the level of services that both towns provide and expect, and our financials, to see the financial resources that we both use, the staffing strategies that we use. And the results of his efforts were that the towns of Acton and Concord provide very similar levels of service in very similar ways to their residents as it relates to police and fire and the communications that goes to feed those operations, and found that it would be a good idea to pursue a regional effort which would provide an opportunities for enhanced services to both communities, enhanced coordination on matters related to public safety and mutual aid, and also professional development and growth opportunities for employees, and abilities to have more robust careers for people in this line of work. And we would get a lot more money from the state 911. So as you know, or as you may know, everyone's cell phone, you pay a little bit extra every month towards 911. The state takes all that money. It's a dedicated resource. They take all that money and then they give it to the state 911 operations. It's an Executive Office of Public Safety. They take that and they distribute it to every city and town in the Commonwealth to help support communications. And it's formula-based, so I think everyone gets a little bit, but programs like a regional program would get more because they're incentivizing that at the state level. And so in this case, we would, and we presented to the select board this concept. We actually went, it was a team of people. It was the consultant I mentioned from the Collins Center, the town manager of Concord, me, the police and fire chiefs from both towns. And we went on a road show, and we went back and forth to the select boards to talk about the idea. In both communities, there were a lot of questions from the select board at the beginning. Why are we doing this? What is it? What's in it for our residents? There was a lot of concerns about where it would be located. In what we're proposing and what we're implementing, it would be located in our public safety facility, the existing facility. When that was constructed 20 years ago, it was built with the idea that it could expand, whether internally or, in this case, regionally. And so there's plenty of room in the dispatch center now to house this operation. And it's a great benefit to Acton because in the case of Concord, where they would actually no longer have a dispatch center I think it's in their police station, that's something that some residents, I think, were questioning in Concord. In the case of Acton, that wouldn't be the case. The team would still be in there. So we gave those presentations. It was in February that the feasibility study was first presented, and then we made follow-up presentations in May. And both boards ultimately approved the concept of establishing a regional governance agreement, which basically laid out the framework for how a regional operation would be governed. It created a board of directors, and the board of directors is the town managers from each town, so I'm a board of director, Stephen Crane is the other board of director, and it created all kinds of other terms for how it would operate, but it essentially would be creating a new district. The people that work in this new district would not be employees of the town of Acton anymore, they'd be employees of the district. And it would have to make arrangements for all the things that we currently have arrangements for: employee benefits, retirement, so on and so forth, insurance, a facility, et cetera. And so when we looked at all that and we analyzed the operational costs, we found that it would be advantageous from a financial standpoint and advantageous from a public safety standpoint. In many cases, this has been discussed across the Commonwealth. It's been discussed here in Acton and Concord, I think at least once or twice in the last 20 years, but there was never support from everybody involved, either this police or fire or this. So there was always a few people that said, no way. In this case, police, fire, in both communities were all in. They still are. They think it's a great idea. They're excited about working together, and they've been very good about collaborating so far. And so the time is right for this, and we're excited. So we received, after the boards signed their governance agreements, we had applied for a grant it's basically like a foundation grant, or it's called a development grant, and this is meant to help with the startup costs for merging dispatch operations. In this case, we applied for a few $1 million, and we were ultimately awarded $900,000. That funding we received this summer, and we're actually meeting this week to finalize how we're going to spend that to invest in developing this district. We're going to be doing two other things, which, again, we were supposed to have a board of directors meeting last week, but it had to be canceled till this week, or postponed rather. But we're going to be discussing a project manager, because part of the $900,000 that we have is to hire someone to come in here and help us work through this whole rollout and implementation, because it's a lot of work. And then the second part is we're going to be hiring an executive director. An executive director is someone who's going to run the operation. And we want to get them on board as soon as possible so that they can help build out the district and deal with all the things that need to be dealt with, and so that the board of directors can just help oversee things and not have to do all the work. In terms of the actual savings, these are estimates, but the current cost for us to provide dispatch services is approximately $800,000, and Concord spends around $800,000. So in total, if you combine those two operations, we spend $1.6 million, and we believe that we would be getting almost $700,000 in funding support from the state to run our operation. And we would also get support to help with some of the capital that we're going to be spending. So the recurring cost savings to the town of Acton is estimated at $375,000. The non-reoccurring savings in terms of the capital investment, we're buying all new consoles. Right now we have, I think, 3 or maybe 4 kind of setups for a dispatcher, and we're going to have 5 now, and we're buying all new equipment to equip those. We're also doing some other things to shore up our technology and our fiber lines and the radio systems, and all that is coming from the state funding. And so that, we're sort of on schedule. The plan was to try to have this all figured out and have the district start running in October, about a year from now. And I think we're on schedule, and we're going to continue working on it and keeping folks involved. We did create a website for the Regional Communications Center. We also created a website for the Board of Directors, just a place where if people want to see the agendas and the minutes and things like that. Since it's interesting because I'm the town manager and he's the town manager, and we normally talk on a weekly basis about things, but whenever we talk about this, it has to be in a public meeting, advertised, which is a little cumbersome, but we've been able to figure it out. We just say,
We understand.
but that's how it was set up, and for good reason. So we have a public meeting. It's going to be in this room. I believe it's Thursday afternoon at 4. If anybody's interested in joining us, it is not going to be, actually, it's tomorrow at 4, right here, if you're interested in joining it. And that's sort of the overview, and I know that there were questions, so I look forward to answering those.
And I think, were you about to say that it will not be recorded?
We're doing in-person meetings right now, and
You said you'd be in here for tomorrow at 4.
yeah,
And that won't be recorded, right?
it will not. No,
Okay, thank
we
you.
haven't televised them.
Okay. All right, does anybody have any questions? While you look for it, I will call on
He needs a
Christie.
mic. You need a mic.
Go ahead, Christie.
Excuse me. Those numbers you just quoted on the recurring cost savings, that matches the May 24th slides that you showed to the select board. Have those numbers updated since then?
No.
Okay. When you and I spoke in June, when you sent an email to FinCom about this, you stated in the email that, let me back up 2 steps. When you first spoke to the select board about this in February, you said there wouldn't be cost savings, but we'd get more for our money. Then when you made the presentation to the select board in May onto the 24th, you said there would be cost savings, which is what you have in the slide there. Then when you and I traded emails about it, you said it could be one or both. Either we get the same amount of services, there would be cost savings, or we'd get more services for our money. I'm wondering where that has actually fallen.
I think it's yet to be determined, but when we say cost savings, it's still going to cost the same amount of money to provide the services. We're just going to get more support to provide those and offset local investments. So it's savings to Acton taxpayers, but it still costs the same.
I don't follow that.
So right now, we spend $800,000 to provide dispatch services, and we get somewhere in the area of some smaller number of state grant every year. I think it's, I don't want to guess, but it's not anywhere near what we would be getting. So we offset the $800,000 with, say, $50,000 to $100,000 we get from 911. If we join a regional center, we're going to get $700,000. So even though we'll spend a little bit more, we're going to get a lot more resources from the state to offset those costs. So it will not cost Acton taxpayers anymore, and I believe it'll cost them less. But since we're still about a year away from implementing this, those exact figures are no better than they were in the feasibility study.
Okay. I'm going to simplify this for my sake here. Acton taxpayers get a bill, which is effectively what will happen with this, right? It's going to be an assessment like we have with the Minuteman or with ABRSD, right?
Most likely.
What I think I'm hearing you say is that bill will be about the same. Current estimate. But we'll get more services from it? I'm confused on where the cost savings part is coming in.
More money for the
More-
state.
Yeah,
But that doesn't change our tax bills.
yeah, it does.
That's what I'd love to understand.
Let me try.
Please
Okay. So what's the total budget expected to be of the combined regional emergency call center?
Right, again, we're still building that out.
So if both towns are paying 800,000 and the expected budget is 1.6 million, then there's no increase in cost. If indeed the state, because it's regionalized, will subsidize us by 700,000 on a combined basis, as opposed to whatever smaller amount we're getting now, whatever incremental state support we get for it is essentially savings. Because we're not getting it now, and you won't get it until you regionalize. And this idea has been around forever. John's right. I think I first heard it about 15 years ago. But it's kind of like in the schools, you get regional bonus aid. You know, when we put Acton and Boxbar together for a while, we got extra state aid every year. So my question to John is not, is there cost savings, but will this state subsidy peter out in 5 years, or will it continue?
Well, unlike other revenue sources that we've come to rely on from the state, this is one that is it's allocated directly from cell phone bills. It's not subject to legislative changes, so it's a fairly stable revenue source.
So, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, may I continue?
Please continue.
If, in an extreme example, if every pair of towns in Massachusetts decides to do this, and the example I'm thinking of is CPC, where at first there was a 100% match, and then more and more people adopted it, and the match kept falling down. Is there a chance that we lose a part of this revenue? Clearly, the thing makes sense now with the additional state aid. And basically, it seems to make sense even if it wasn't there, because it's not really costing us any more. But what happens if that pool of state aid now has to be spread among a lot more towns?
I'm not aware of any threats to the revenue. I think, as I mentioned, the state is incentivizing this so that, instead of having 350 dispatch centers in Massachusetts, they want to have a lot less, and the idea would be it would cost less to operate less than it does to have everyone have their own. Even, as you mentioned, even without the state subsidies, there would be efficiencies
Right.
when you combine Acton and Concord. So if you take the efficiencies that happen anyways and add on the extra incentives, that's where it comes to be a financially advantageous proposal. I did just find the budget that was in the study. Again, it's just preliminary, but they said it would be $1.5 million to run the operation. We'd get in the area of $700,000 from the state, so Acton and Concord split the $800,000, which is basically cutting our costs in half. But that's not something that we can guarantee, but it's an example of how the incentive would help reduce our local costs.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Roland.
Thanks for the presentation, John. Excuse me. So you're going to be hiring a new head to run the whole operation. So is that person's salary and benefits figured into this cost savings? Or is that in addition to, so you know what I mean? So, yeah, you're going to get $700,000 from the state, okay. But now we're going to hire somebody and we're going to pay them, say, $120,000, maybe more, I don't know how much that would go for. But then you get benefits and everything else, pension and all those liabilities that go along with that. And is the cost savings that we're projecting including hiring more personnel?
Yes.
Thanks.
Jason?
Couple of questions, if I may. Just to follow on to what was just discussed about, is this subject to the whims of legislative change or the whims of change in Boston? How many years lead time or how many years guarantee do we have for state match? Do we find out once a year, or do we have like a 2 or 3 year lead time so that we can plan accordingly? Or is it a rolling year-to-year thing we find out at the end?
It's an annual process.
Okay, so that does have some, if there is a change in the formula, that's not a huge amount of lead time for us. To follow on to the question that Roland just asked, so if they hire a new executive director that will be part of the new district, will there be a corresponding reduction in force on both Concord and Acton side now that there will not need to be that level of oversight from the police and fire departments?
Well, no. The dispatch operation is overseen currently by a dispatch lead and then by the command staff in the police and fire, which is the deputy and the chief. So we would not be reducing
So
those
those
positions.
people are freed up a little bit, but not enough to reduce a head count anywhere.
Right. Well, so the way that the governance agreement works is that right now, I'm the town manager, and I hire the police and fire chief, and they oversee the dispatch center. And the same thing happens in Concord. But what's going to happen in the governance agreement is that Concord and I, the manager over there, and I will be overseeing kind of the bigger picture like I do now, but the actual day-to-day oversight is done by the fire and police chiefs in both towns. So they'll still be involved in what happens in public safety. The executive director would be essentially a department head overseeing this department of probably 15 or so people. And they would work closely with the chiefs, but the chiefs would, the director would report to the board of directors, which is me and Steve.
But bottom line, it's another municipal employee without a reduction in the headcount elsewhere.
Well, no, that's not what it is. We would be taking our existing employees, and they wouldn't be town employees anymore. So we'd be losing all the dispatchers that are currently town employees. They become district employees.
Plus the executive director, so I'm not going to argue with you.
Well, right, so we have dispatchers and a dispatch supervisor right now, and we'll still have those. They'll just be part of the district.
Right. And the towns will be net one municipal employee through this district. The
No.
towns will be, the municipal employees currently will be moved to the new district, but there'll be yet another employee at the executive director level.
No.
How is that not the case? You just described that we're hiring, the district is hiring an executive director.
Right, but it's the same as we have now. We have someone that runs the dispatch center now.
Right, we have one in each town. Right?
Yes.
So why are we not having a reduction in force somewhere? If we're going to have one person where there was once two, why is there no RIF anywhere?
Well, we haven't finalized that. There may very well be, but I'd like to give everyone a chance to join the district if they're interested. This isn't a, we're not trying to reduce headcount. We're trying to be more efficient.
A couple more, if I may. With the school district, when we joined the district, we had to sell the schools to the district for $1. Are we selling part of the public safety facility to the new district? Are they
No.
renting it? How are we doing that?
It'll be subject to a lease.
Subject to a lease. So the district will pay for the space that they use in the Acton facilities.
Yes.
The corollary to that is, does this shorten the lifespan or change the calculus of the longevity of the public safety facility?
There's no way to calculate that, but I would say no.
Because it was built big enough at the beginning that it's going to absorb this, no issues, and we're not going to have a problem where suddenly we come back in 3 years and go, now that we've got this extra couple of dispatchers in the building's too small for the function, and now we have a problem. This is what I'm trying to avoid. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think that it was built to support a larger dispatch operation than we currently have. The rest of the building really wouldn't be impacted by that in the way that we've set this up for now.
Great. For the municipal employees that are going to be now part of the district, of this new district, what does that do to our OPEB liability? Does it become the responsibility of the new district, and will that have an advantageous effect on our outstanding liability?
We're still evaluating exactly how to do the math on that, but it'll end up being, they cut over, and at some point it becomes their liability. But we haven't solved that exactly. There's a few things like that. That's why we need the director and the project manager to get going on this, because it's a lot more work than we thought. You know, it's a big project.
And then lastly, I think I heard you say that you're not looking necessarily to have any change in headcount. But does this have an impact on the number of union jobs? Does this have an impact on the number of jobs in the immediate term, or is it the plan in the future to be able to capitalize on these efficiencies to potentially reduce headcount?
So in regards to the current employees, we're not telling them they have to leave. We're hoping that they all want to join the district. And if if we need less employees than we have 5 years from now or so, I think we would make those decisions. But I think just the fact that right now there's 2 people dispatched, like right this very second, there's 2 people dispatching in Concord and 2 people dispatching in Acton. And then if this thing gets resolved, there'll likely be a total of 3 people dispatching, covering both of those communities, depending on how we do staffing. But that's one way that it could be. That will require less people, but it depends on how we do the staffing. If we go to a 5 and 2 instead of a 4 and 2, and there's a lot that needs to be worked out. But this, you know, in terms of OPEB liability and pension liability, we expect those things to transfer to the district at some point that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, sort of a technical question. With the landlines basically going away, and almost everyone has cell phones, you know, if I called someone, my number would show up as a Vineyard Haven exchange. How does the system know if someone would call 911 from Acton or Concord? How does the system, considering it's a cell phone, know that where that call is coming from? If the person didn't give an address.
Right, so
do you know that?
that's a technical question that I'll try to answer. I think a while ago, like you say 5 years ago, whenever you called 911, on your cell phone, it would always go to Framingham, to the barracks there, and Framingham would have to figure out where to send it all over the state. Now, it's more localized, and I don't know how it works, but when you call from here, it goes to Acton, is the simple answer, but I can get you the more technical answer.
It probably is. Yeah. Okay, thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, John, and I appreciate your patience with the headcount questions. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about that, and just to simplify is, you know, you have a dispatch group in Concord, you have one in Acton, and they both belong to separate unions. And with this agreement, one of the presentations said they'll have an opportunity to work with the new district. And so, can you just give us an idea, numbers-wise, like what are these 2 groups of people? Is this one 8 and this one's 7, or is it 15 or whatever? And then what does that mean, like an opportunity? Because if the district forms, some people may decide to do something else. They may decide they don't like the compensation structure, et cetera. And so maybe there'll just be some natural attrition through that sort of mechanism. But just first question is, how do those numbers just generally work? And do I have that conceptually right?
Yes, you have it conceptually right. We have approximately 10 full-time, and we have a few part-time dispatchers here. Concord, I think, has less than 10. Yeah, approximately the same.
About the same.
They run a different schedule than we do, and some of these questions are getting into collective bargaining, which we're actively in the middle of. But what I said in that presentation, I would say again, is that we'd welcome all of the employees that we have currently to join this district. And I believe that, as you mentioned, through attrition and through other means, it'll work out, basically.
And I guess to follow on to Jason's question, that if you look forward 3 to 5 years, you have 10 and 10 put together, and let's just say the district forms and it's 18. I'm just making up a number of dispatchers. What efficiencies would you see with that? And I don't mean particular to Acton and Concord, but this program has been around a while. I'm just not as familiar with it. But what efficiencies does the state hope to get by combining these into one? And is it lower head count per call? Is it just, greater use of the equipment that's there? Is it better staffing hours? I mean, just as a generalization, how does that work?
I think all the things that you just said, I think, are part of it. I think it's better for safety of the Commonwealth as a whole, to not have so many different operations running, trying to communicate and collaborate with one another. And the more collaboration that happens automatically or organically as part of a group that's already been formed, the better coordination across town lines will be, and the better they'll be able to respond to major incidents and minor incidents. Because if you look at Great Road, that, we've shared a lot of space with Concord with that, and a lot of police activity that we have crosses the borders, and there's always a time where we're trying to communicate with one another, and this takes that out of the equation. They're already in the same room, they're already talking to one another. Fire, mutual aid happens on all borders, and that wouldn't really change. But having this greater coordination with one of our larger partners or one of our larger neighbors would be a benefit to both communities to have better coordination for that. So I think from the state's perspective, I think having less of these out there is better for public safety. And it's also less groups of people that they have to help provide resources to, and they can consolidate the resource allocation.
But but down the road, there technically would be these efficiencies, as maybe, and there's probably a lot of examples out there around the state already where towns have combined resources, and they found out that instead of 20 people, 18 is just as effective, and its service may go up even, just because of the scale advantages of having that. Another question is, if we look back at the school district combining, one of the concerns was just sort of the loss of autonomy that Acton as a whole, is now beholden to what Box Road residents want with the school district and so on and so forth, just like we are to some extent with Minuteman. I'm curious in this, just how, as a town, you thought about giving up some of that autonomy, and certainly there's advantages in a lot of areas. And what are the negatives? What are the drawbacks to this, like from a town perspective?
Well, it's important to note that we're not regionalizing police services. We're not regionalizing fire services. Those are two areas, very, very high-profile services that we provide, and there's policy. There's an opportunity for policy differentials between one town and another. Our police department could be really focused on something that Concord isn't, for example. For public safety communications, they're all doing the same thing. They're all answering the phone and making sure that resources are allocated to protect people as quickly as possible. It's standardized in terms of how they do it. It's standardized in terms of the rules that they have to follow. A lot of the rules come from the state anyways. So in terms of autonomy, we're not really losing much in terms of our identity. As I mentioned, the public safety communicators are a big part of our public safety response. They are the first responders. They're the ones who actually deal with everything before anyone else. So it's very important, but it's a position that's very professionalized and very technical. And I think it easily, or not easily, but it's well suited to be combined with another town, because it's sort of the starting point, and then it goes to the agencies that they go and actually respond. It's different than it was 25, 35, 40 years ago, where it would be, a firefighter would be downstairs answering the phone, it's not like that anymore. It's very professional, very technical. They have all kinds of computer screens, all kinds of data entry, mapping, and they actually perform, it's called emergency medical. They perform the first tier of medical support actually on the phone. And these are all things that are standard protocols that you wouldn't really do differently in one town to another. So I think in terms of services that are, regionalizing is not easy. I've been in this business for 10 or 15 or so years, and there's been a lot of things that I've personally tried to regionalize, and it's very difficult because it's always about, I want to do things the way that we want to do them here in Acton, and, for example. But in the case of dispatch, I think it's well suited to regionalizing without losing our identity as a community.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that is, I know nothing against dispatch, but it's like, I think different than schools where you could have your own very specific identity with the schools. But, one of the concerns would be is if another town would enter into this agreement, for example, 3 years down the road, and then there would technically be a voting, there could be a majority with them voting to do something which could potentially not be in Acton's interest, as you can have with Minuteman and potentially other regionalizations that exist otherwise. I was just, I'm always, just as a risk mitigant, just always curious to think about those things. And then, and just one other question, maybe one longer one and one quick one is, did you have a follow on that, Roland? What I was talking about?
Well, my question was, is the walk-up window that's currently in the police department with dispatch, is that still going to be there in the future? So if
Yes.
because I went in there the other day, saw somebody was injured, and I was at CVS, and I talked to the store person. They're like, "Oh yeah, we know. We'll send the manager out or something." I'm like, I'm driving home. That's not the response. So I went in and I told the police, and they sent somebody down. So just curious.
Yeah, the window would still be there.
Thanks.
And just maybe last one question is, just from a warrant perspective and a budget perspective, is like, how will this be broken out for a town meeting vote? Is this, this has already been approved, so the agreement exists, right? Is that the town meeting would simply approve the budget for the new district? And would that be like a separate item, or how would that actually fit into like a town warrant?
Yeah, so we actually just kicked off the 23 budget process last week. And the way that I would envision it is that in the recommended budget, there currently is a budget program for dispatch services, and that would probably remain that way. And it would, instead of being operational expenses, it would be the cost of the assessment. And we may not be ready for this budget. We're still sorting that out. I guess we will have to be.
Would it be a separate warrant?
We'll have to be.
article? Like what you have with the schools now? You have the schools one, you have Minuteman one, you have the town.
No, I think it would, as I mentioned in my response to you a few weeks ago, I see it more closely aligned to the regionalization of veteran services that we did recently, where we're simply sharing the cost of something that we spend money on. And in the case of communications, we're, instead of investing in our communications program all by ourselves, we now have a partner that we're investing in it with. And so that would be reflected in the budget request.
Jason.
Thank you. You had mentioned that you believe that this will actually increase not just cost savings, but general safety in the two towns. Do you know what the state is using, or what do you plan to use as well to measure the increased safety or the increased services level? What metric are you going to use to show that there has been an increase in services or an increase in safety?
Well, again, this is a question that's probably better to be answered by the chiefs of the public safety agencies, and I've heard them respond to this question at select board meetings, and I think they've all pointed to time. Time is a very important matter. Seconds matter for medicals. Seconds matter for most things. And I think if there's less seconds required to communicate and collaborate on a cross-town, inter-town issue, then those seconds would be the benefit to safety.
So the average response time per incident is something that ideally would go down?
I don't know that's exactly the same. The seconds happen in the dispatch office. So yeah, I think average response time would be something that we would look at, but I think if it didn't go down, it wouldn't be a sign that it wasn't working.
Just curious what other metrics you'd be using. Thank you.
My guess is it would be difficult, given we're pulling a new fire station online at the same time. Christy?
I personally would like to see this as a separate warrant article, because we are not, in fact, simply sharing costs like we do with the Veterans Affairs. If these employees are no longer going to be Acton employees, but are going to be employees of this regional district, it is a fairly different thing. It's, to me, much more like the school or Minuteman than we have with just using some of Mr. McRae's time and sharing some of his benefits that still fall under us. Question for you about how dispatch has worked out with this, because they were fairly vocal, some of them at least, about concerns back in February. Has that been cleared up at all? Have they come on board, or that's what you're negotiating now? And
Yeah, I think you may have heard from one employee who I think had a lot of thoughtful and important comments that night, and we've also been talking with all the employees all along and considering all that input and feedback. And so, yes, we are in the process of collective bargaining, and I think that all the concerns that were raised, we have been considering and will continue to consider.
thank you. I appreciate Mr. Martin standing there. I am disappointed and somewhat dismayed that this was not brought before the Finance Committee before this was decided and signed onto. I'm specifically dismayed by the Select Board's not requesting any input from us in terms of this being a fairly significant financial decision, and seeing as the town manager works for the Select Board, I place this more firmly on their shoulders and hope that we can improve this relationship such that that is attended to in the future.
I'll take a question from Mr. Noonan, and then I will hear from Mr. Martin. Go ahead, Steve.
This is just a tip. Probably the most unpleasant surprise in the school regionalization was the Middlesex pension calculations. Everybody was surprised how different they were than our assumptions. And I realize you're dealing with tens of people and not hundreds. But percentage-wise, it could still be a big hit to your estimates. It was probably double the number we expected in the school consolidation.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been in touch with Middlesex. Concord, as you know, has its own pension system, so we've already started to talk about how that transition would happen, and I hope that the estimates aren't too far off.
Go ahead.
Hi, if I could just make a comment, I'm David Martin, I live on High Street. So I happened to be with my oldest daughter this weekend. She works as a paramedic outside of Madison, Wisconsin. And I talked with her about this as someone who is dispatched rather than someone who does the dispatching. And she says for any incident involving mutual aid, the common dispatch is enormous, enormously helpful. Right, and those things involving mutual aid are the big things, the huge pile up on the highway or the big fire, for two reasons, she said. One is the lingo and the procedures tend to be normalized or commonalized among the departments over time, right? So, sometimes she goes to a neighboring community and they have a different way of working, or they actually use different terminology in some cases, and that's not always obvious when she first now she knows all the communities around hers, but it wasn't obvious in the beginning. And the second thing she said is because of the dispatch, they can all hear the dispatch, and if she hears of a big incident and she's already handling a call on the side of her town that's near a big call, she'll actually keep her ambulance on that side of town just in case they call more ambulances. So you can imagine an ambulance in Concord that just has made a call on the west side of Concord, and they hear about a big fire in Acton or a pileup on Route 2 in Acton. That ambulance in a similar situation might hang back on the west side of Concord, expecting that there's going to be another call. And for the communication between the Select Board and the Finance Committee, I'm eager to make that happen.
Thank you. Last question. Go ahead, Christy.
Apologies, this is not a question so much as a good point that Mr. Mangiarotti made back when he spoke to the Select Board, which is that one of the benefits here is if there's a significant incident in one of the communities, you can have all of the dispatch respond to that. So it's not just your 2 dispatchers from your town, but when there was the large fire in Concord, they really needed more dispatch capacity than they had. So we unfortunately could benefit if we had a large one here from having that, but the surge capacity is a lot better.
Thank you very much, John. You're good. If there's anything else you wanted to share, you wanted to sit here longer?
I'm ready for more questions. You sure?
I think we'll learn more as the Board of Directors meets and as this becomes more evolved, and we look forward to hearing the process in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, if you'll bear with me for a second, I will share my screen and we will do the first pass of the point of view, which always takes longer than we expect it to, which is why I would like to get to it. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Mike, who is on the Point of View Committee and hopefully has some notes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Person. We had a preliminary meeting a few days ago. Unfortunately, Roland wasn't able to be there, but we got started with basically reviewed every page of the point of view, and I think our strategy is, our goal is to shorten, cut the length of it, maybe reduce some of the redundancy, eliminate some pages, maybe not just eliminate them, but hide them, use them, if it's a valuable information, we'll just use it as backup, but generally it's a lot of things in there that I think people, the general public, their eyes might glaze over as you're talking about it, and so we want to make it more interesting, more tells a story about the economic condition for the town of Acton and what our goals are, obviously. So basically, we reviewed, as I said, every slide. And starting with like slide 3, well, a slide like that, for example, would be eliminated. It's sort of just redundant. Slide 3 is our town economically. Those, I will be updating those numbers. Slide 4, our town financially. So Hannah will be updating that information. Slide 5, Sahana will be checking with you for the sources of that data, and then we will be updating. Slide 6 is the demographics. That will be updated, especially since we just got census numbers for the decade. Slide 7 is the spending. Roland will be updating. Mr. Roland.
I'm sorry, can you go back a slide?
What's that?
Can you please back up a slide? Please turn on your microphone. it says demographically, but these are in fact households, right? Can we make that clearer? I don't know why I haven't noticed this before, but I'm looking at going, wait, we have 22,000 people, why does that add up to 10,000? So I would just like to request that change.
Well, that's why I said we will be updating it. I think it's, what's our population now, 20 of, I don't know, the household, we have to look at the household, but the population generally for the last, 5-6 years has been generally flat.
And for you, this information comes from the town manager.
Okay. That's good. Okay, slide 8.
So page 7,
Slide 7, spending, that's your baby, Roland.
I'm going back to it, it's just on a delay.
Oh.
And these come right out of the warrant. These should be pretty easy to access, and Mr. Barrett can help you. And
so that was from last year's, maybe from last year's.
exactly, it's from the previous year's warrant, just to be a benchmark for understanding what pockets of money we're talking about.
Yeah, for the record, we might be looking at other metrics that are not included in this point of view that we think might be appropriate, or if you have suggestions of a metric that works, like some of the things that Steve presented at our last meeting were kind of interesting. So we're going to try to freshen up some of that data and the way it's presented. Slide 9 is, slide 8, revenue sources, Sahana will update. Slide 9, debt service, there's basically no change in that, or very, very little.
And you can get those from Mr. Barrett.
Right. Slide 10, our town reserves. I think we're going to move that slide to a backup. We're going to hide it. We'll have it available, the information available, but I think you can get off track of discussing stabilization funds, enterprise funds, and so on. We'll have the numbers updated, but I think we're going to hide that slide. And again, this is our first pass. You know, if later on we, as part of our discussion and our review, you guys want it included, you know, that's another story.
I can understand, I like the idea of updating the numbers and hiding it if you want to keep people from having their eyes glazed over. But I do think we need to have it somewhere in the active presentation, the total amount of money that has been paid by the taxpayers that's being held by the town.
Yeah, we can do that.
And if you want to collapse it down to a single number, I'm fine with that,
Yeah.
to make it easier. But not having an eye on just how much money we hold in the taxpayer's name, I think would be a mistake.
Right.
1 second, Mike. Given that we spent a fair amount of last year coming up with a free cash policy and are hopefully going to be discussing a stabilization fund policy, and we've explicitly used those, I think this information needs to be fairly front and center and should be kept split out. I mean, not just in Jason's idea of combining all the money.
Okay, and I was going to say that I don't think we should collapse the numbers into one figure. I think that is deceiving. And I don't know that I think that it needs to be on its own slide in the presentation and not as an addendum item, but I do disagree with Jason's suggestion that you make it one number.
Okay, I hear you. But, you know, there might be, you know, another way to present this data that
Yes.
would be more interesting.
Hold on, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, I was just looking at the numbers and adding up in my head, and, you know, when I look at the free cash to stabilization fund, the E&D and the AB stabilization fund, then we got about $10 million, which is about 10% of our revenue.
Exactly.
Or, you know, so a higher percent of the tax levy, and I think, to Jason's point, that kind of a metric is interesting.
Right.
Because
Now,
we are essentially sitting on reserves that
Right.
are more than 10% of the
Right.
tax levy.
Are we overtaxing the people?
One can draw one's own conclusion, Mike, but I think it's an interesting statistic.
Didn't we take money out of stabilization last year for the budget? So that number's going to change.
Yes. Yes, agreed.
11 free cash, also we're going to, that's going to be a backup. It's important data, but it's another one where the general population, their eyes will glaze over, especially trying to explain it when I think sometimes we have trouble understanding free cash.
Steve, who's our intended audience for these? Is it the select board? Is it the school committees?
In the past, we have gone on the road and taken it out to community groups, PTSOs, senior center, basically anybody that would listen.
Yes, the citizens of Acton is the
And
intended
In the
audience.
way past, we used to get it published in the Beacon when it was mostly a narrative. But there's really two presentations you have to make. One to the general public, who's, Mike is absolutely right. Most of this is lost on them, and the presentation needs to be shorter and a little punchier and get to the point quickly. And that which you might want to present to the Board of Selectmen or the school committee, which this stuff is perfectly reasonable to expect them to understand.
Correct. Okay. Slides 13 and 14, they're recession slides. We will, that will be updated, and we'll talk about whether it's hidden or not. Because the economy this year is different from the economy last year, and our prediction for the future economy we'll talk about. But anyway, they'll be updated and reviewed, and a decision will be made if, they stay or go away or be hidden. Slide 15 and 16. We have that's an interesting slides. It's something we will update and we have to talk about too. So we'll be discussing that, how the data is presented and if it's relevant, we'll see. But we'll be looking at those carefully, slides 15 and 16. Slides 17 and 18, we will talk to Mr. Noon.
Hold on a second, Mike. Go ahead, Christy.
Mike, back on the compensation slide, I would be very interested to know what % of that is contracted employees, however you want to say it. The union people, et cetera, who have a given, we know what their increase is over time. How much of that salary fringe, et cetera, is effectively set in stone and cannot be modified? Just so we know, yeah, compensation growth has been greater than 4%, and we're actually looking at 5 or 6 going forward or something, just to have an idea of what the future expectations are, which I
Right.
think could be
And
sort of
sometimes when you have a number like that, unless you compare it to something else or some other entity, you have to do something to give it relevance. If it's 4%, if it's 5%, you have to explain, is that good, is that bad, is it outrageous? So it would require some explanations and some analysis and some comparison.
I think we're maybe talking at different angles to each other. I completely agree with what you said, and I think that in light of the 3% natural tax growth would be good to highlight with this data.
I think that's an example of information that would be good to have for two of our audience, and then information that
Yeah.
would not be shared with.
But if you could find that,
Exactly.
I would love to know it, or get me to help
Right.
try to figure it out. I'd be
There
like-
may have been a year or two when we actually did a table, I think it was in backup of the status of all the collective bargaining agreements. What years were settled, what years were still coming, which is easily obtainable. Town manager and the superintendent.
Jason?
A number that I'd love to see is what percentage of the 2.5% allowable increase in tax is already spoken for as a result of the union contracts?
Well, we'll see if we can calculate that. This is committed to unions, to collective bargaining. Okay, slides 17 and slide 18, they're OPEB, other post-employment benefits for our TV audience that maybe are not seeing the screen. We're going to work with, the committee is going to work with Mr. Noon to see if this slide and the next one can be, we'll be updating that, and if it could somehow be combined. Again, it'll be one less slide, and
Yeah, there's
consolidate that data somehow.
there's new information, so yeah, it could be. I can update it and maybe make it one.
Good. Slide 19, future capital projects. That obviously will stay, but it needs to be updated.
Yeah, the number on the DPW building is much less than,
Right.
we under-guessed there. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Yeah, as I said, the capital projects will be staying, and that'll obviously be updated. Slide 20, capital project recommendations. That may be eliminated or hidden as a backup, that slide. Because, things change, and we'll be discussing that.
I just want to make sure we don't get away from making this a tool, a document that isn't just informational, but expresses what we expect to happen as a result of the data. So I don't want to lose, all of the recommendations, is what I'm saying.
Well, I'm not saying it goes away, it just might be moved to background, been hidden, yeah.
Maybe it's later in the presentation, I don't remember it. I would love to see some mention of the capital improvement plan and where we sit on that. I know that was finalized after we did finalize this presentation.
Yeah, I said that was, we're going to, capital project recommendations, yeah, that's slide 20. Reserve policy, slide 21. Obviously, we'll be updating that, and we'll be keeping that slide. Slide 22, land purchases. We're going to look at that because now it's sort of history, but we're going to be updating that, and it might go back in the as sort of data that is stored in a hidden file.
I would agree with that. We've sort of beaten this one for the last 3 years. Go ahead, Steve.
The only comment I would make is, and I agree, we've beaten the detail to the point where I don't think we need to specify the projects, but in fact, you can draw a pretty direct line between these land purchases and the Moody's downgrade of our bond rating. So
Yeah,
that
I
is-
think
that
there
is- that is, the point we were making for years is these things have consequences, and
Right.
that's an example of consequence that we could foresee.
And the message we want to project, if any of the Board of Selectmen are listening, I don't know if any of them are in the area, that, you know, these land purchases, before we commit a lot of money to these land purchases, we have to have a clearly stated purpose, you know, why we're buying it. Because several of these, as history has proven to, you know, has really been lost opportunities, lost revenue, Main Street, River Street, et cetera, et cetera. They might, something good might come out of it, but it cost us millions of dollars and really was a mistake. And I don't think there's any other way to put it. So,
The Maple Street, the parking fees to pay for the purchase, well, that's going to be a lot longer than what initially because of COVID.
Even that with the best laid plans.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, when that was purchased, none of us would have ever imagined.
there were
Attorney.
negotiations with the owner of that property that went on for years.
Yeah,
And I think his purpose and our purpose were basically the same, to use it as, to get income from parking, and parking was needed. Now it's not needed, at least, I don't know how long that's going to last. But
that we
maybe
don't know.
Maple Street even could be considered for, you know, if we ever look at development in South Acton, it could be a key parcel to, you know, solve some of the parking from commercial opportunities that may exist in South Acton. So we'll see. But we'll look.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm wondering, does it make sense at this point, since there seems to be a lot of things that you're trying to take out of or hide from the main document, which I understand the desire to do that when your audience are the PTSOs and the Rotary Club, et cetera, but I fear that you're taking away way too much of the teeth of what we're trying to say to the board to the select board. Does it make sense for us to split this into two efforts, to have the select board facing document and a public facing document instead? Because it seems like a lot, you know, the whole purpose of pointing out the warts of the recent past are specifically to remind the select board of the mistakes that we've made. If you don't want to have that in the public document, I get it, but if it's not in our point of view, as we've seen over the last 6 years, if it's not in the point of view, the select board says, well, it wasn't part of what you told us about, so therefore we don't care. So I'm very concerned about this becoming too watered down.
Well, our goal is to take it from 24 slides down to maybe 15. So there's a lot of stuff that's in there that doesn't need to be in there, things that could be updated. I think our message can be stated. I don't think our to the select board, if you, you know, can still be in there, but we need, it just might come up with another way of saying it. We won't lose any of our sharpness.
I look forward to the updated president.
You know, we're looking at every slide just to make it for readability, for the information that's in there, how it looks into the future, how it looks into the past might not be as relevant as the future. So we're looking at every slide, and we'll be bringing back, obviously, this presentation to the committee periodically, so, you know, you'll know what we're doing, and, you know, we can discuss and make changes, see what works, what doesn't work. It's not just going to be the subcommittee that decides what goes in it, but, you know, we're making suggestions.
Working group.
The working group. Working group. Right. Land purchases, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Slide 23, takeaways. We'll be updating that. That might be combined with the previous slide, too. Obviously, that's where we'll have our message, our summary, and our point of view. Slide 24 is the update. What's slide 20? Oh,
Yeah, we're there.
thank you very much.
No problem.
That's where we stand. And we only had, as I said, one meeting. We're going to meet again this week. We have a date set up. We'll incorporate some of this new data, and we'll get back to you. Our people will contact your people.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Steve, noon, is there any chance of seeing some sort of document of what we used to submit to the Beacon?
Boy. It was a long time ago, in my recollection, it was back when the point of view was more of a narrative document, and when we would send it to the Beacon, they'd always tell us to, like, cut it down to, like, a couple of column inches. But I'll see if I've still got anything on my computer that looks that way, because, yeah, we used to do it.
That's a good point. We could, once we have our data updated, summarized, homogenized, and pasteurized, we could also take a crack at translating it into 2 or 3 paragraphs narrative that could be published that in local newspapers, in Action Unlimited, and so on. And, this would really be the data part, and, we'd have 2 versions, a data dog and pony show, and then the narrative that people could read in 5 minutes and at least get a general sense of our position. So that was a good idea.
Excellent. All right, anybody have any further thoughts on the point of view right now? All right, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Finance Committee business, we do have one set of minutes that I'm going to pull up. Maybe. Did everybody get a chance to read through the July 13 draft minutes?
I haven't seen anything.
Okay, apparently, I should have forwarded those out. They came to...
Steve
an
sends
odd
them
group of
only
us.
to you, and then you have to pass them on.
Got it. All right.
I was gonna say,
So be, watching your email in the future so that you can read those minutes, because I know you don't want to miss any of the details, and we'll vote on them at our next meeting. All right, liaison reports. Roland, do you have any? I do not. Dave, do you have any? Mike, do you have any? Jason?
I'll let it go.
Steve?
I don't have any liaison reports, but I have not had the opportunity to thank the lady at my left for her year of service as chair of the committee. And I didn't want to let another meeting go by without doing that.
Thank you. Christy, anything?
Nope.
Dave, you were saying?
Madam Chair, it pleases me to make a motion to adjourn.
Do I? The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?